The State of Real Estate with your host, Gerry Lantain.
Welcome to the show today. This is The State of Real Estate, and I am your host, Gerry Lantain. Today, we are going to be dealing with foundations, and we're going to talk to Nate Gill from RSM Contracting. But first, we're going to do the market report. Today's market report is going to compare last month, May, to the month of June, just so we can get a sense of what's happening in the market right now up here in Muskoka. These statistics are brought to you by the Lakeland Association of Realtors. Okay, the average price between May and June rose by about 3.5, so 3.49%, which is an interesting indication because a lot of people have been asking, where do you see the market going? Prices spiked between October and January of last year, and people are thinking, oh, are they going to keep spiking? And I was thinking to myself, no, they're going to level off and plateau, but they're not going to go this way. So they're on a slow rise, and that average price indicates that from May to June. New listings are down by 13.5% from May to June. So less people have put their homes on the market this June, which could cause a bit of a problem and push it back up into a seller's market. The inventory, so the total amount of homes for sale, is that is actually up by 13.5%. So there are more homes on the market. Actual sales are down by 17% from May to June. So what it looks like is a lot of people might have been tired with all the hot market and the bidding wars and all that stuff. So less people have been buying homes in June, which keeps more homes on the market. The percentage price, so the percentage of the original price of a home compared to what it actually sold for, is down by 4%, but most people are still getting over asking for their home, which means the market is still pretty hot. Average days on the market from May of this year to June of this year has gone up by 20%. So in May, it would take you on average 10 days to sell your home. In June, it's taking 12 days to sell your home. So again, it shows the market's cooling off a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. Not much, but a little bit. So bottom line is it's still a seller's market. Things are cooling off just a little bit. If you're thinking of buying, it does indicate that your investment will have a slow increase in value. And with summer coming along and the reopening from all the COVID lockdowns, people may not be as interested in buying houses this summer as they were last year. So it might be a very good time to look for a home on this market. Again, it is a seller's market. We'll be back with our interview shortly. Welcome back to the show, and as promised, we're here with Nate Gill. Nate, can you tell us the name of your construction company?
I own with my friend Carson Fowler, RSM Muskoka.
And you are Nate Gill. What is RSM Muskoka?
It stood for Rock Solid Masonry.
Ooh, I like that, Rock Solid Masonry. And it's a good thing because today we're going to be talking about foundations. So, foundations. There are many, many different kinds of foundations.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, up in our area, when people are looking for new homes, what different types of foundations might they find? So let's start with the oldest and move to the newest.
So your oldest would be a sort of a barn-style foundation. It would be stones mortared together, usually in a thick wall.
Okay.
And that was just, they used what they had laying around. There wasn't the production for blocks and other more modern things. And there are still a lot of houses around here that have stone foundations, some of them in good shape. And
generally, how thick would they be?
Usually around a couple of feet.
Okay. All right. So that's a lot of the older homes that you'll find in the Muskokas, especially the ones that are in town and closer to 100 years old, will have those big old block foundations. We'll talk about what can go wrong with that after. What other types of foundations might we find here in Huntsville?
You get poured concrete foundations as well, and they did start to do those at an earlier time. So some of those older foundations will have repair sections that have been done in poured concrete foundations. Right. So they're normally about half the size, depending on what they're talking
12 inches?
Yeah, around that.
Okay.
And for the older ones, and then new ones, you can get, with the engineering on the rebar and stuff, you can get into narrower ones to do newer poured concrete foundations.
Okay, so a solid poured concrete without any rebar needs to be really thick?
They just made it really thick because they didn't have the the rebar to put into it to give it that reinforcing structure inside of it.
So that's what rebar means, reinforcement bars.
Yeah.
Years and years, I just thought it was called rebar. Cool, okay. All right, and then with reinforcement bars, then you can do thinner pours, which is less expensive, I guess?
Yep.
Okay, and moving forward into more modern?
You get into concrete blocks, and now we're into insulated concrete forms, or ICF foundations.
ICF foundations. Those are the styrofoam blocks that has cement poured in the middle. Those are really good for insulation value, is that right?
Yep.
And other reasons, like acoustical resistance?
Yep.
Yeah,
they've kind of become the top level of what you want foundations to be so far.
Okay.
It's, you know, it has a thermal value of R50 for the product that we use.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's a much more solid, more resistant. It's most of them, you know, for a standard house, you're gonna have a 6-inch solid cell inside of it.
Yep.
And then 2 1/4 inches of
styrofoam?
Of solid foam insulation on the outside of it.
And it's also got rebar inside of it, is that right?
Yeah, lots of rebar.
Yeah.
So you have horizontal and vertical rebar inside of it, and then it's
okay.
It's very solid.
I, as a real estate agent, have come across wood foundations.
Wood foundations are another thing altogether. So they did build foundations out of, and we don't do this.
Yep.
They built foundations out of pressure treat.
Okay.
They would frame in essentially a wall and seal it and backfill against it. And it's funny, until this summer passed, I had thought that they were not really a very good idea for any of what we do.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive to have a wood foundation.
Yeah, and we've gone and looked at, because we do a lot of foundation repairs, jacking the building up, tearing out everything from underneath and replacing them to correct structural problems.
Yep.
And a lot of those were wood foundations.
Okay.
And for the most part, they were just destroyed.
Right.
And then this last summer, we actually went and looked at a place for some people to replace their foundation, because they had heard the same thing and knew they had a wood foundation.
Yep.
And called and just had immediately assumed, as I did when they told me about it, that, well, that's got to go.
Right.
And it was in fantastic shape.
Awesome, good to know.
So it's not something that I know much about, nor would I put it into a new one, but it's not necessarily, if you buy a house and then when you're tearing out your basement walls to look at things, you find that it is a wooden basement, it's not necessarily the end of the world.
So you don't have to panic if you have a wooden foundation.
Because these people had a wood foundation that was, I think it was close to 40 years old, and was in, as far as we could tell without digging up the entire house,
Good. That's
was
good to know.
was in immaculate shape.
Yeah, good. That's good to know, because I have run across that a couple times myself.
Yeah.
So, I want to get into like how to deal with problems on the second half. But is there anything about a foundation, like, how does a foundation work? Tell me what, from the bottom up, what's got to be done, and then what's backfill about, and...
So you start with a footing, which is just a poured slab of concrete, and the thickness and the width are all determined by what kind of building is going on it, what kind of foundation is going on it, and it's all got reinforcing bar, and as well, it depends on who's.
So a footing, what does a footing hold? Or what does a footing foot?
A footing is the bottom of the wall. So you'll have your wall comes straight down on the center of that footing, and it projects out the sides and carries the weight on the ground. So it keeps the foundation from sinking into the ground. Okay. Now around here we have a lot of bedrock, so we still do the same thing, but it's to give you a solid base to build your foundation off of.
Okay.
And then
where does the poured floor or the floor of the house get dealt with?
The floor will go on top of the footing.
Okay.
So that you have a sealed area. So you'll have to have vapor barrier so that it keeps so you'll waterproof the outside of your foundation.
Yep.
And then you want a vapor barrier the inside under the floor and over top of the footing.
Okay.
Because where you have that joint is an area for moisture, and in protecting its ground moisture as well, you want to wrap your vapor barrier up the wall, and then you pour your concrete floor on top of that, so that everything's its own sealed unit on the inside and then waterproofed on the outside.
So does the foundation then, the actual blocks or whatever you're going to use, poured concrete, does that sit on the slab or the footing?
It sits on the footing, and then the footing will pour out against the wall.
Okay.
And in cases of garages and some houses around here, they do monolithic pours.
Yep.
which is just a large concrete floor with footings built into it. It's all poured as a monolithic slab, so one pour.
Okay.
And then you can build straight off of that.
All right, I saw a house being built, and there was a garage, and they dug it out,
Yep.
put a foundation wall, into the ground, and then they backfilled it. Why would you do that?
For structural support, I would imagine.
But wouldn't it be better just to sort of put a concrete slab down and then build your garage on that as opposed to going into the ground? Because they backfilled it with like stone and stuff. So they dug it all out, put in a foundation for the garage, and it's just the garage part of the house. So I was wondering why did they backfill it?
It's on the inside of the garage.
Yeah, so the garage was built into the ground.
Yep.
And at ground level, before they poured anything, it was all dug out, so they backfilled it with stone.
Yep.
But
they put a wall down the middle. Okay. Usually and same with the outside of the garage, with the monolithic slab, you have to do a lot of insulation and stuff because you get into frost problems.
Okay.
So with frost, you want to get your walls down below frost level, which is 4 feet.
Okay.
So you want the bottom of your footing to be below the 4-foot mark from your finished grade, so that it doesn't catch any frost, which will cause heaving and breaking.
Okay, well that solves that question. We're going to cut away for commercial. We'll be right back with Nate, and we'll see you soon.
The State of Real Estate with your host, Gerry Lantain.
Okay, welcome back to the State of Real Estate, and we are talking about foundations with Nate Gill from RSM. Ha! I saw your hat. Okay, so now that we've sort of discussed what kind of foundations, how foundations work, what do we do when there's a problem? Let's start with a problem I've seen a lot with some of these really old homes, stone foundations. There's moisture, not necessarily water coming in at all times, although I have seen that, but spring runoff causing a problem and or heavy torrential rain areas where the old stones have obviously got areas water comes through. How can you deal with an old stone foundation if you don't want to replace the whole thing?
Well, as long as it's still structurally sound, and again, that's a timing issue. You want to get at your foundation problem, because the problem with foundations is that everyone ignores them. When you buy a new house and you're doing renovations, it's always it's buried on the outside, it's in the basement on the inside, and it's not very pretty. So you deal with the things that look aesthetically pleasing, but it is the structure that your whole house is built on.
Yeah.
And with stone foundations, it's the same kind of idea. They weren't really worried about damp proofing per se. They've done it so that it's not going to fill up with water, but they weren't worried about a little bit of moisture getting into the basement back when they were building these places, because it wasn't really a big issue to deal with.
Right.
So now if it's structurally sound, you can dig up the outside, dig it all up, and you want to smooth off that outside surface and clean it all off nice, and then you can put on waterproofing. So our most common one is we would parge over that thing, and we would use a roll-on adhesive. So it's a waterproof membrane that sticks on.
Right, Blue Skin, is that right?
Blue Skin is a brand name of that.
Okay.
We use a different one that's made by Safina, but it's all the same thing. It's just a rubberized membrane that sticks onto the wall, and it's meant to keep the moisture on the outside of the thing.
Okay, how far down on the outside do you have to go?
Below your floor.
Below the slab?
Below the inside basement floor. So if you have...
So you don't have to go deeper than the footing?
No.
Okay.
Well, that's the next thing, is you need good drainage.
Okay.
So you want to have O-pipe with clear stone that's been filter cloth to protect it
Can
from
you explain
filling
what
up.
O-pipe is to some of those people that might not know?
O-pipe is just a 4-inch, either solid or perforated pipe, perforated for around the basement, and it creates an empty space and a channel for water to get to. So when rainwater hits, if you have good draining material, which you need to have,
We'll talk about that then.
will run down to it'll draw water down to itself, and it will have an outflow. So you would have your basement ringed in the O-pipe. It would collect water from around the basement that would normally want to get into your foundation, because you've created a vacuum under the ground.
Okay.
It's essentially wanting to draw water in.
Yeah, because water goes to the lowest possible space it can find.
Yeah, and on the easiest route. So if you've provided an easier route for water to escape, and then you pipe it out away from the building and let it do its thing. So you're basically just creating a dam around your house so that the river flows around you.
Okay, and this can be done with any type of foundation, right?
Any type of foundation. We do.
What is let's start with O-pipe, but how do you properly backfill a foundation to make sure the water is going to drain? Like, what's the process?
Well, you really just, that's what you just said, is it needs to be good draining material. The
So
quicker
what is
it
good
drains,
draining
the better.
material?
Clear stone is really good. That's why they use it around.
And what is clear stone?
It's just, you get it in like 1/2 inch or 5/8. It's washed, crushed stone.
Okay.
So you get,
So it's like rock?
yeah, so it leaves a lot of holes in between because they just kind of stack up, and
Okay.
it leaves a lot of openings. But even good backfill sand, which is just a coarse sand, will drain nice enough. So normally you would only have to put, because clear stone's fairly expensive because it has to be washed and whatnot. So you do a couple of feet of clear stone, and then you'd fill the rest of it with good draining sand.
Now, the draining sand, over time, will that not sink through all that rock and find its way in between the rock and block it?
So you filter cloth over the top, which is just a fine
Yep.
mesh, I suppose.
And that's right
Almost like a cheesecloth.
Right.
So it would keep the sand from being able to get through that and contaminating the stone and getting into the O pipe. Because that's a lot of the problems are is that if that's not done, is the O pipe will end up solid filled.
And the water's going nowhere.
Right. So then the water starts piling up on top of it because it's been blocked from its easiest access around the house, and that's where you start having water problems inside.
Okay, let's talk about another problem. Concrete block. I'm looking at the side of a house. My client wants to buy it. We're out around back and we can see the foundation because it's a split level, and we see a big crack in the block that goes like almost like a staircase along.
Yep.
What caused that? How do you fix that?
Well, there's the causes are almost always natural things like frost,
Okay.
water sitting against the basement being able to freeze. So it's that expanding and contracting, because water will expand 9% when it's frozen. So water saturated soil, such as clay, which will hold a lot of water, which is a big problem for places that are broken. We normally find that they've been backfilled with clay, just because it was there and it was easy, and
they just shoved it in.
they just shoved it back into the hole. But clay, once it's saturated with water and freezes, will expand 6%. So if you do that a number of times, it's going to break something, whether it's below frost line or not.
Yeah.
Just that saturated expansion
Yeah. Okay,
will break it.
yeah. Now that crack I'm talking about, it follows the concrete block lines, or sometimes it can go straight, whatever.
Yeah.
Is that a structural worry? Is that a very bad problem if there's a crack line in, and say it's about a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch?
When you're getting into spaces like that, you do have the severity of the issue will depend on the cause and what's happened to it. It could very well just be a shifting of the building, or it's hard to say, but it's definitely something you should have looked at.
Is there a way to fix a crack like that if it's not a major structural problem? So that, I'm sure water would get in there and cause worse over time, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's definitely ways you could, it would essentially be a patch job, but same thing. We've done ones where you core through the wall and fill the blocks, because the concrete block foundation for the most part stays hollow.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
So if you have an area like that and you want to tie it back together, you would rebar it, concrete it, and it is a solution of sorts.
So you don't have to lift the house, you don't have to do anything.
Right.
Okay.
But it's another thing where you do want to have somebody who knows what they're doing look at it, because if you don't address the original structural issue that caused that problem, it's essentially just a Band-Aid. Because there's no stopping the forces of nature that have caused it to do that. So it doesn't matter how much rebar and how much concrete you get into that thing. If the original problem is not solved, it will break again.
Okay. Let's just say that we're talking about any house in general, the foundation has to go. Say it's just destroyed and it needs to, I know a couple of homes that are for sale that, need new foundations.
Yeah, we do several of those a year.
What's the best way to deal with it? And what is the best foundation to replace it with? And how do you deal with that? Gosh, what's the problem? You gotta lift the house.
Yeah, it's definitely a process, and same thing. That's people always kind of balk at the idea of it because it is large. But like I said, it's the thing that's holding up everything else.
And it's a game changer if you if you re-solidify your house like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you started out with structural support is the most important thing when you're building a house. You need to have a solid base to build anything off of.
And a quick one, just before we go, what would be your recommendation as the best product for a foundation if you're putting a new foundation in or building a new home right now?
I would go ICF.
ICF.
Like if I was building to put a foundation in my own house, I would always go with ICF.
All right. A little more expensive?
Well, not with the cost of lumber these days.
No kidding, eh?
But it's your insulation, your vapor barrier, and it's a more solid product.
Okay. Nate, can you tell these people how to get a hold of you?
You can email us at rsmmuskoka@gmail.com or call me at 705-380-2837.
Awesome. Foundations. Take care, everyone. So the tip of the week this week is about foundations. When you're looking for a home, or even if you own your own home, it is a very good idea to walk the perimeter of your house. If the walls are exposed in the basement, always have a double good look at them. See if there's any phosphorescence, which is that white powder on the bottom of the blocks. It would indicate moisture. If you have a moisture problem in your basement, it is something you probably should deal with right away. Just for the safety of your own home and the potential damage it might cause as it goes on. So if you do discover your home has a crack or a leak, get it fixed as soon as possible. That's the tip of the week.
The State of Real Estate with your host, Gerry Lantain.